strategy for change, which is quite a simple story. So I'm going to tell you the story of the story up front. First, we had two strands of modernization, one that I was on and one that Chris was on. We came together, there was an event storming workshop, and it changed some things in our modernization. That's it, that's the whole talk. That's all you wanted, you can go now. If you are curious about the weaving together of these threads and how that sort of played out, we can tell you a little more about that. A little bit of context first. I'm Elizabeth. Chris will tell you about himself in a second. We are employed in federal government. We are still employed in federal government. I'm here in a personal capacity myself, and yeah, I want to take a second to acknowledge that things are very weird. And we are bringing what we can in this moment from a situation of chaos and uncertainty, but also what we're talking about today has nothing to do with that. It ends before any of the chaos started, and therefore, I think, treat that how you will. We will tell the story that we have. That was the story, and that will be, I don't think there will be any part of that in that story that we're telling. A little more about me before I hand it over to you, Chris. I just want to let you know that I come from a product background. I've been in product management for about 18 years now. And before going into government, I was with a dev tools company named Redgate, and we were working on database DevOps tools. And so I developed a really strong instinct for continuous delivery at that point and brought that with me into government.
Yeah, well, thank you. So I'm Chris Lauer, and the Chief Architect for the National Weather Service. And I've been in this position for about a year and a half, returning after doing some really cool DevSecOps stuff at Air Force Castle Run. I'm a software and close-to infrastructure backend guy, but I don't have that much in this role. I'm the Chief Architect of enterprise applications, and software, platforms, and on-prem, and cloud, and everything. But we're in the middle of this big modernization of the Weather Service, and they hired me as the first Chief Architect to come in and take a hit at this from that perspective for the first time. Well, we're gonna try to bring this into weather alerting. I don't know if you guys know what weather is. If you opened your door this morning and walked outside, the thing that hit you in the face, that was the weather. And sometimes the things that hit you in the face they're exceptionally interesting. And that's where weather alerting really comes into play. So that's your wildfires, that's your hurricanes, your floods, your big blizzards, snowstorms. I guess we're getting one of those today. Tornadoes, and I think I'll talk a lot about tornadoes today because I think people kind of understand that. Solar storms are also in there. But your alerts, your watches and your warnings and separate talk, I might call them that, whether those are the right words. That's a ridiculous language. But somebody's sending those out, and you're getting informed about this thing that's life and property, and these are really about responding to threats to life and property. And so where do these come from? Well, you've got 122 weather forecast offices scattered around the country. And these are architected in 1994, just pre-internet era, right? So connectivity is not really there. And they're architected to be close to the radar because, for example, tornadoes, you need to see the radar at very low latency, right? You need all the data. So you could say, oh, look, that's the tornadic cell, let's issue the warning. That's the cell with the hail net, let's issue the warning. And so why do you need so many of these? Why are there 122 others, 122 radars? Why is that? And I promised I wasn't going to say anything controversial today, but the world's round, right? And the radar beam eventually goes off over the horizon, and it isn't displaying. So these are all architected really on-prem with secure network connections to send out these alerts because they push the button and then it goes somewhere. They have these really fascinating, complex tools with decades of business logic for how to quickly issue a tornado warning, format the text, and say where it's going to be, the storm's been. So you have all this complexity building up over time there, and on these little on-prem systems close to the radars. So they push the button. They don't really know what happens. They did their job. Our website updates and says, hey, there's a watch or a warning or something to watch out for. The message gets out to FEMA iPause somehow, and that's just an acronym for a system that sets off your phone, right? And it sets off your TV, or used to. It doesn't work on Netflix the way it did on broadcast television. Sets off the NOAA weather radio that maybe it's in your school or in your local county government or whatever. So that people know they need to take an action because there's something data to prepare for, or get ready for, and respond to, some throughout the life of the problem. But what happens in between that is kind of the hard that we're going to talk about next. But the big context is the National Weather Service is changing their whole architecture. Well, we have the internet now, right? So we could get this radar data somewhere else. But the forecasters, the model's gotten really good. Forecasting is getting easier. And so they don't need to sit there making a forecast in a building all day. And where the real value is putting them with the decision makers. So that's this nimble, mobile, flexible AI. So that the person in the State Emergency Operations Center that's trying to figure out how much coastline to evacuate, they've got a person there with all the tools and all the data and all the knowledge about what's about to happen from a meteorological perspective, helping them make the best decision they can. And that's sporting events, wildfire rides. So that means they're freed from this desk. They're freed from that on-prem secure enclave that they had before. And that's a huge change in the operations model of what a meteorologist is doing, which is going to drive a big change to how the IT system needs to look. Right? Now you need all these tools out there in the field, and they have been architected to very much not be that. And then that's going to drive change to how our people need to work to deliver those systems. And so this is our old domain silos org chart, which I was always kind of proud of. This felt really domain driven to me. You got observations, you go get the weather data, right? Radars, right? Central processing, you go process the data, make a model, you got your tools that visualize it in. Dissemination, you get those alerts, these warnings, this forecasts out to everybody that needs them. And then you got this little feature, Office of Science and Technology integration, that's research, that's dev, and that's often so silo, not very helpful, but there's ways of getting the innovation out of there and together. And then on the bottom right, you have the field off on the other side of the organization. So that's this 122 forecast offices, national centers, the hurricane people, the storm prediction center people, and the water people. And those, maybe they have some small technical teams out there, but they're buried under layers of non-technical leadership, meteorologists, right? So it's pretty hard to diffuse the technical innovation across the organization. And so when you think about that, you end up with this, which was a diagram I drew just after this conference last year. So notice my boxes are numbered now, before they were not. So down there in box 1, you have 122 weather forecast offices with all that tightly coupled infrastructure, the physical location, and then a tiny little bit of network connectivity. Back to, I'm just going to skip to box 3 for a second, the dissemination platform, which is to redundant data centers. So it all goes there and goes out to the world. That's how everything works, right? And then in box 4, you've got these additional on-prem environments that aren't like the ones that are in box 1, but you've got like roughly a dozen of those. And that's where I spent most of my career in the weather service. So I started at the Hurricane Center in Miami, and we had our own thing there, and I realized I didn't want to just write Perl for the rest of my life. So I came to Boulder to work at the Space Weather Prediction Center, and that's where I got an agile DevOps, domain-driven design, and figuring out how to build a platform with containers and sorts of cool stuff, right? And then I looked up and I was like, nobody else in the weather service is doing this stuff. Like, how do I get it out of the silo that I'm in? And I couldn't crack it. I couldn't figure out how to get through those layers of non-technical leadership and share all the awesome stuff we were doing at Space Weather. So I left and went off to Air Force Castle Run, got into DevSecOps there at scale on operating platforms. And then the weather service transformation I talked about started, and I looked for chief architects. I was really excited to come back and hit that problem from the other side. And so just before the conference last year, you'll notice that the things in the diagram are not numbered or even in boxes. I drew this after talking to about 50 people, after I onboarded, talking to leaders, going through workshops. I used the script from the first 90 days is a great book for understanding an organization and getting the value out of those conversations. I realized we were trying to flip our architecture from that previous one, where what you're doing is moving data between all these systems, to this one, where the data is all in one place. And you're just trying to put all your tools close to the data and make sure your people can get to the tools. And a little bit of this was happening because these systems in box 1 and box 4 and box 3, like, they were sprawling, take you 3 months to get a small change delivered across the whole system. Or in some, you can only ship once or twice a year. So you weren't getting fast feedback. You weren't getting, high performance in your door metrics at all. Like, it's a low performing organization in most of these, right? And that's kind of frustrating. So there in box 5, you have these cloud efforts emerging in the same silos that the on-prem system was built in. And so you weren't getting the economies of scale around all the government, compliance and security and FinOps and the whole learning curve for what the cloud even is and how to do cloud native architectures were all kind of in these silos. Observability, right? Some people had a little bit of it, lots of people hadn't done that yet. And so trying to pivot to deliver a cloud that can kind of handle it for everyone. I drew this diagram. People got really excited about it. We have all the data now instead of just what comes through that little soda straw we have out to the field. We have some parity dev environments we can work on improving our cadence of delivery. And then all we need for the general public, and the emergency managers, and scientists and forecasters with the tools is a way to access the tools that are hosted in the cloud. So it's more of like a SaaS model for everything that we're doing. So we had so much energy in the organization when we saw this because everyone really resonated. Like I built it with the practitioners. So much energy.
But meanwhile, we're going to switch over to the other timeline. The other things are happening in my world. We're the Technology Transformation Services, which is in the General Services Administration. I joined an organization called 18F, and my very first assignment in 2018 was to go work with the state of Alaska on their Medicaid modernization. And they had just had a huge disaster, like a really big failed procurement. Things were on fire. The delays in processing were really significant, a big political moment for them. And at the time for 18F, that was very much like our sweet spot for our theory of change. So we went in there. Our theory of change was there's a big enough failure to kind of unfreeze things in the way things were. And so we want to direct that motivation, that feeling of surely we can do things better next time towards some healthy practices. So we were going to be right there at the right moment to take them on a journey towards good development practices. And so we were trying to set out this really clear choice for them, like you could do it the way you did it before. No, that was bad. Or this thing where we would land a single empowered Scrum team, get them comfortable with it, easy, small experiments, delivering regularly, something they can feel and feel really good about, that they know is going to be on track all the time. So that was what we were trying to do there. And so this was the roadmap I was handed. These are, by the way, actual sources as far as possible. We're trying to use original materials from the things that actually happened. And so I know it's not legible, but that's in part on purpose because this was a very long and beautifully constructed roadmap that my team had developed already before I ever landed on the ground. And they did a lot of analysis with the organization, with the state of Alaska. They did a really good job of helping people get comfortable. Like, this change will get you all the things you need eventually. So a provisional way it might work is this very long roadmap, but don't worry, we're going to start in box number 1. We're going to make a unified search that just touches all these data sources and solve the problem of you needing to swivel chair between systems and a lot of manual effort to try to figure out what was going on with a particular person and the Medicaid eligibility. We were going to put a search on top of all that. So I picked up this roadmap, and they basically built the search capability. We needed to get permission to hook it up to actual data sources, and we still needed our authority to operate as well. Anyone who's worked in government in the US will know that authority to operate is quite a big and scary thing. It's the compliance documentation that you're going to need if you want to operate something legally. And this often takes a really long time. Like, the fastest I've ever heard of it happening, like the lightning fastest, was a month. But much more often it takes about a year to get the documentation done and then go through all the exercises for compliance to get a system operational. And so we had done things right with the team. Like, we had gotten security involved in the really early days. We tried to shift ATO left as far as possible to try to make sure security knew what was going on at every stage of development up to that point. But nevertheless, it turned out they didn't really engage until it was built software sitting in front of them, ready to go, at which point they said, whoa, no. And it wasn't, no, you can't do this. It was just, okay, we're going to have to go through this. It's a full ATO process. Like, this isn't any kind of lightweight reuse anything. You really need to do this properly. And so we needed to go through the ATO for the search. We needed to ATO our DevOps pipeline. And as it turned out, we also needed to ATO 6 systems that we were touching of data sources because the previous configuration had left them operational but not legal. So we got hit with 8 ATOs, and as it turned out, we inherited, therefore, all of the compliance debt along the way for everything we touched. And it was thought, like, unified search would be lightweight, we don't need to get involved in existing systems, turned out completely wrong. So that really knocked us off our not just our timeline, but also off of our theory of change. Like, we were supposed to be chugging things out, getting things out regularly, understanding that we get things through production and it works, rather than, oh no, we got it built and now there's a 2-year delay on actually operationalizing it. And so it really, for me, coming into this new environment, I was like, well, okay, we were supposed to be able to be nimble and fast, but it's not looking so much like the choice is this big waterfall, big bang thing, or single pound scrum teams live regularly and it's awesome. It's actually starting to look like that team can do stuff, but it took us 18 months to get to the point where that first box on there, that first box is the unified search, that very first box up there. And it took us 18 months to get to that point, so it's not really working the way we were saying it was going to work for people. And then add to that, there was some political instability in the state. The person who was actually our stakeholder, chief stakeholder, left in some political changeover. And so, we then lost our top cover, and it was really starting to look like this. Like, we were trying to modernize the system, but the system was coming right back at us. And so we had not adequately accounted, we thought, for the fact that we needed to be operating at the system level as well as at that single empowered Scrum team level. And so I personally thought, well, okay, what is out there to help us operate at that system level? So what can we do now that we know that it's not big bang system upgrade or single empowered Scrum team, that there's something else missing from this story? What is it that we're going to need? So that's how I personally got involved with DDD, with that team topology. It was actually my first entry into the systems world for random reasons. Systems thinking, started to kind of explore this myself, and I got really excited. I thought these tools are so promising to help work on the system at the same time we're trying to do things in micro. We could be actually doing things that help put our finger on the scale of success for these operations. Like, this is great. And so I tried to bring some tools back into ATNF, and I failed. First just trying to get people excited about, oh, look at these new areas, and then they're too busy, not interested. I failed with trying to bring specific types of workshops in. Like, I tried a lot of things to try to get people excited, and it wasn't that nobody was, but it was definitely not seen as, it wasn't seen as fit for the moment we were in. I think there was still a belief that, like, single empowered Scrum team was going to work when the setup was right, and not that we needed other tools. So I did not succeed at that for many, 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 many attempts. But then I had this idea, because there was one other dynamic I noticed, which is that the product people heard the words domain-driven design and team topologies. And they were like, product people, that's not us. That is definitely engineering. That has nothing to do with us. But you go to the engineers, and they see domain-driven design and team topologies, and they're like, that Zoom level? That is definitely not us. That is definitely the product people. And so both sides were kind of saying, well, it's not really us, it should be them over there. And so I thought, aha, I know what I'll do. I'll find someone from over there, I'll get myself an engineer buddy, and we'll go and we'll do something, and then we'll land it back in the organization together and just say, it's everybody, it's not engineering, it's product, it's all of us who need to zoom out and understand the system. So that was the theory that we were going to do. And what did we do for this? We went to a wonderful workshop, which many of you may have gone to this year. I think it was run again. It was really good. It did exactly what we needed. It actually gave us some tools, some frameworks, some stories. It was spot on. And so we did this with the motivation of, okay, we're going to pick up these tools and then we're going to land them back. That was what we were going to do. But we realized, well, two things. Like, on the positive side, our organization was really, really close to these things already, and we didn't know it. Like, we were really good at collaborative modeling, and we were really good at, like, large-scale facilitation things. Like, we were done it in value stream mapping, and like journey mapping, things like that. So we were super close. But unfortunately, we also like, well, we can't have these things in here because we just like went to a workshop on them. We have to like do it, right? So we figured we were just going to go around and here we were at Explore DDD last year saying, hello, does anybody need some advanced domain facilitation? Any? And lo. Wasn't the first time we met. I knew Chris, so we were kind of kicking around, and he was like, yes, please. And I was like, no, not you. Hello, does anybody need some facilitation? Like, no, not you, Chris.
All those things you said you were good at, your first point, your collaborative modeling. That's what we need.
We were, but I was very skeptical about that because, like, that's real. Like, you saw that system. Like, that's real weather alerts. Like, lives are on the line. You shouldn't have somebody who's never facilitated this stuff. Like, loose on that was our take, right?
But have you seen the diagram?
I did see the diagram because you were shopping around everybody at that point.
Yeah. So we have a picture of the alerts, like where that happens. So the data comes in and the data goes out. And there's a bunch of things, pieces of software in there. But nobody understands how that will work. Well, it's scary, right? It's kind of important. You want those at the same time, reliably. And yet, we don't really understand what's happening inside that box. It feels pretty minty.
It did feel minty. And yeah, and it also happened that we had an engagement, 18F had an engagement with NOAA at the time, and we could kind of fit it in somewhere. So in fact, it kind of worked out. But we were really nervous. Like the engineer I had grabbed, his name's Alex. Like Alex and I were going like, we shouldn't be doing this. It's actually like irresponsible for us to be facilitating this in such a high stake situation. So we kind of, we're like, okay, we'll just like put lots of caveats around it. And like, you all realize this is really experimental, right?
And yet also, we've got all this passion, all this energy down inside of us. These people haven't seen each other in a decade or never met in person. They're deeply curious about what else is happening in the organization. And we just really need to get them in the same room talking about this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it needs to be well facilitated. You're an excellent facilitator. Or if it's not well facilitated, we'll be united against the facilitator, and we'll also work.
He did actually tell us this at the time. We were like, I guess that's comforting. That's great. Anyway, this was the box that, the version of the diagram was shopping around. We did give in. We're like, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to buck up and do it. And we were still doing the like, okay, well, we'll tell them this experimental and don't expect too much. But we also, Alex and I decided to ask Big Two for advice. We're like, okay, we're going to do this thing. We really think, we're in over our heads. Can you help us out with a little more like advice on this? And the first thing he was like, do not tell them it is experimental. He was extremely emphatic on this point, which is advice I really appreciate, because he was saying they need you to act with confidence. And this was a good facilitation reminder. Nobody wants to know you're in an uncertain circumstance when you're being facilitated, right? You want to know the person's got it, that somebody's going to handle what comes up in that room. So that was great advice. And also reminded us, as we know as consultants, like do rounds with participants, get your one-to-one calls in, get your context going, understand the language, get your 3 questions, your 3 framing questions to make it super clear what you were meant to achieve during that day. And he gave us some additional recommendations after we read Alberto's book together. We have his additional recommendations on top of that, where know your start and end points going in, have them nice and clear, and make sure your stakeholders also very clear about whose workshop this is, what we're trying to answer, set the context and all that. So that was the advice, very good advice. And so we did it, literally went down the list of things he told us to do. And so here are some of the things that we heard in advance. Do you want to?
Yeah, so the system is a giant rubber band ball. It's like every time we needed to do something, the rubber band is built up over time. It's on top of itself. There's not much support for turning things off. You can see it'd be pretty hard to pull a rubber band out of there. But also, our stakeholders care about all the things we do. There's always somebody that cares. Some farmer in Iowa that cares about this one thing you're doing. So you can't turn it off. And it's really hard to know, that we haven't done an upfront DDD here. It's really hard to know who the players are, who owns which pieces. It's hard to track it back to the ownership. And also, we really need this workshop. Really need this. You heard that from lots of people.
We heard that from everybody. They didn't really know what this was. We kind of tried to explain to them roughly what was going to happen. They were like, we don't know. We just need to be in a room with each other. Like, please, just get us together. So the energy was there, and that turned out to be really important because there was a really strong impulse to talk to each other. These were people who, like, the most junior of them had worked there for 13 years, and there were people up to 30 years. And they never actually met each other. Like, they'd been on the other end of calls or, other end of problems that had happened, but never been in a room together. And so they really, 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 really wanted to do this. So this was the framework we ended up with. This was the actual thing we got at SPC, as they did a highlight for day 3. One of the reasons I'm copying this exactly, I'm telling you, we're using source materials here. We didn't understand this. Like, Alex and I did not know what a day 3 outlook meant. I was like, sure, it's not supposed to be a 3-day outlook? No, it's a day 3 outlook. Okay, what's SPC? Don't worry about that. Well, we didn't know, but again, we were trying to get just deep enough that we could try to, to help the people who did understand all the details. And so this was the actual framing they used from the day 3 outlook warning, which is.
Oh yeah, so right, like you're looking at the models and you're looking at the state atmosphere, weather balloons, oh man, on like day 1 was what's happening, day 2 was tomorrow, day 3, day after that. It looks like the situation is setting up that we need to start thinking about here, because we're gonna have a lot of alerts in 3 days.
So
From the storm prediction center.
Yes. So they were about 3 days out from, something really bad is going to happen. And then, the whole weather thing happens, and then it ends with.
Yeah, well, it's the last warning is canceled. It's done. Like, there are no more alerts here, and we've gotten through the system that moved across the country, and then they issued their last, like, Friday morning. So
That was our box to operate in, understand what systems were doing what along the way. And this was a literal plan. This is what we did. We did those, standard facilitation things. The reason I wanted to flash this up, though, is I feel a way about warm-ups. Icebreakers can be agony. But sometimes when you really hit something which is relevant to what you're talking about, or really, really meaningful to the people in that room in a way which is special, like common to them, but not to outsiders, can do a really good job of unfreezing things. And that was this one about the formative weather event. And we just kind of threw that in there. Like, I don't know, weather probably means something to these people. They're all weather nerds. And it turned out to be a wonderful, actually very heartfelt opening as people talked about various weather events that had changed their lives and brought them down the path they'd gone on. So that was learning for us, among other things. So this was the actual thing. We had 1 day to get this done. We could not negotiate more than that. This was what we could do. So this is what we tried to do in that time we had. It was about 20 people in the end. We managed to talk to about 80 of them in advance, but about 20 people there on the day. Just did the thing. We set some expectations. We set those endpoints. We explained to them what they were expected to do. We told them to put their Post-it notes in past tense. We did the things we were supposed to do with event storming. We did a little more, better explanation. And then actually got people to come up and write their events on the board, post their events, and did the reorganizing, and then having people tell the story of the board. And so this is what it looked like. This is where we got to. People participated. They got right into it. They were excited to do the thing. They were very engaged with the process, very excited to get to have those conversations. And so, what we saw in the room that day, the energy really carried. It was there. People wanted it. They were going to make it what they needed it to be. But also, we had our nice set boundaries. But the first thing somebody did was break the start boundary. She's like, no, we have to start with the weather balloons. Absolutely cannot start with that. Okay, so we went to that. So, even the best laid plans, but it was fine. It turned out all good. One of the things, those of you who are familiar with event storming may spot here, is that there is a challenge to having an actual, time thing of events going on in the background while you are also trying to do, system events. There was definitely a tension there between those two. What does the sequence mean? How do we interrelate the actual, what's happening with the weather to what's happening on these Post-its? And so there was some confusion about how they do that. In retrospect, I probably wouldn't have done it quite the same way. OMG, TA. This whole, can you see right in the, I guess it's on the left, the 4 pieces of paper in the background, that was all acronyms. That was our acronym menagerie. Because even they didn't all know all of their acronyms. And so we did decide to collect them. So everyone wrote them out on the acronym menagerie, which is also good fun. Sorry, one more. And then, yeah, the one other thing I'll say is people told us in advance they really wanted it to be actionable. Everyone wants that going into a workshop. They want it to be actionable. We kind of knew we weren't necessarily going to get to very crunchy next steps in the one day. We were going to be able to get people to have those conversations. And they absolutely did. Like, they talked to each other, they asked the questions, they really engaged with each other around these events. But did we get to the now what very well? Not really, but luckily Chris was there to take it up.
Yeah, it's government, so it doesn't happen super fast to impress people. But so what happened after the workshop? Well, first step, the event storm had 400 post-its. We got it. It was pretty impressive. Gathering knowledge and outpouring of information. So they got cleaned up and organized and digitized so we could reference it. And then, well, I'll just kind of talk about it. We formed a channel real quick, so we kept the community, the people that were there in touch, and we still use that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Yeah, I mean, we learned a lot of technical things that we all kind of suspected going in, I think, but this stuff made it really, really clear. So we have these over a dozen protocols and flavors of protocols, and everything's going to be passed around in inconsistent ways. But publish subscribe is dominant, and it's in there. But it's all implemented with Pump 7 before it was cool because we needed it before a lot of other people did. So we've got our meteorology way of doing it, LBM, DDD that you've never heard of. It's really 90s cool, right? And then dozens of data formats that are all structured and fit for purpose. And every time you transit one of these values, you gotta decode this and then change it to that format, pass it around. You know, things you've heard of, obviously, you can use every day, like Group 2, buffer engine packet, and CF, and HDF5. You know, the joke that a single observation, a single weather balloon is decoded and processed 200 times in the weather service. You know, just there's a lot of duplication in these silos. And the data flow is organic. It's built up over time. It's that rubber band ball of there's a problem today, and we don't know who's supposed to solve it, ideally, but I know a guy that could probably do it, or maybe I could just do it myself real quick. So trying to get that done, right? Because these are all people who care deeply about the mission and deeply about the impact of what they're doing. And so they're going to do whatever they can to make it work that day. But that's built up that rubber band ball over time. And nothing is deduplicated itself. Just there's lots of duplication in the silos and the systems. And what came out crystal clear, so my big distillation for the workshop was my favorite Mark Twain quote, which actually is a Mark Twain quote. I didn't have time to write a short letter, so I wrote a long one instead. And that's kind of what we did, right? And so we need to invest money and time into doing simpler things the simpler way. Go that little extra mile, do it the simpler way. And so we need that structure to help us do that. And we need these new domains that cross those organizational silos because we're trying to figure out how to do cloud in all these places, and that's really hard, and it's taking longer cycles. Data, we're now changing our understanding of data from how we structure each individual system to something that serves all enterprise. And network, getting to the cloud from all those endpoints and doing it securely in a different way. And not to say we weren't already modernizing some applications and doing a little bit of more cloud-native styles, but like we really needed a place where people could even start to do these things. And so a lot of this needed to happen in these new domains before the applications could even become a new focus. And also out of this workshop, I was able to draw a diagram focusing, just following the data. Where does it sit at rest? And what does it move between? And this is that architecture that just follows the data. And those red lines are where the alerts need to get back and out. And those two systems we're talking to are, they're geographically redundant, but that box we showed, what happens inside that black box, that's those two systems. So it really ends up being kind of a simple place to focus. But yeah, we've been able to contribute to this diagram, and I have each thing labeled with a number that corresponds to a spreadsheet somewhere that tells you how big the bandwidth is between those systems, which pretty well encapsulates how much data needs to flow there. So that's been really helpful to have. And then the community has been, that's really been the thing. We've captured the energy, we introduce people to each other, they're now able to ask questions because they know everybody's good at it. And ask those questions in front of everybody because we've got that channel. And that conversation is still alive. So somebody has a question, how does this work? They ask it in there, and three other people were like, I've been curious about that for 15, 20, 30 years. And finally we had the conversation, we're going to write that down and capture the documentation, push on that ambiguity and show that understanding. And so that's been really huge, like I capture that energy and turn it into a community. And also, just before we got to that, one of the big challenges I had in the silos is they had no way to collaborate in code. They all had their own version control if they had version control. And so we were just launching GitLab around then, and I was able to pivot a lot of the energy there and like, hey, get on our shared GitLab instance weather service. Why? Move your stuff here, I'll share tickets, I'll show you how to do a backlog and the Kanban board, and it's going to be awesome. And it really has captured a lot of that energy and made it possible for people to collaborate, because that's where the system was really conspiring against us. But the big picture takeaways is this culture change was unlocked here through practices and tools with Strive behavior. But in engineering, you're kind of forcing the behavior through the practices and tools you adopt. And event storming is a practice that really had this moment for us, and made it really easy for us to talk about the challenge of the system. And we still talk about and reflect on this day all the time. Like a lot of our meetings where we do anything generative and post-its, we're thinking back to this. Like this is the first time many of these people have done something kind of generative like this, and shocked them into thinking in a different way.
Yeah, and my strand was pretty awesome because it did actually do the job we hoped it would do. Like, we came back to 18F with this, this wonderful group of very happy partners. They helped us out by saying, "We are so happy," to lots of people, which was extremely helpful. Thank you for that.
Sure.
But also, we did our job of telling the story of what happened, what the need was, what how it unfolded, the need it met, and what transformation was possible because of it. And we took it to our separate corners. So over here in product, over there in engineering, some other spaces where it was relevant. And suddenly people have this really good, this really positive view of these practices. They felt like they were hearing about them everywhere these days, which was totally an engineered outcome, right? But it was really important, I think, to give it some kind of oomph in the organization. And they did agree that it was a small step for many of them to be able to facilitate this kind of thing, even, that you can get started with it. We didn't do it all perfectly. We certainly didn't do it all by the book, but it's okay to get started with it and help it meet your moment for change. And that was all kind of given permission through that process. So that really did do the job. And our metric of that was like, will people keep running event storming after this? Will other people run it? And yes, people did. And then can we become a method card? We were on our way to that. So yes, that has done the thing that we were hoping to give that additional perspective to people to be able to bring into their different consulting engagements. So takeaways from this talk, like the energy is really important. I always believe this in product. I believe this in any kind of transformation, that if you can follow the energy that's already there and help to weave it together, then that's your best chance of architecting really sustainable change. And so it's not only that, you do sometimes also need to make the energy. Like we made some of that in 18F and we were trying to bring it in there, but we were doing it in a social way, and we were doing it with an intent to try to, again, like take some of the energy that was there, inflame it, and then bring it to a new place. And the second point is the human relationships are important. Like, I would love to be able to stand up here and tell you that it wasn't, that you could come into a new circumstance with no, relationships already, bring a great idea and have people adopt it. Like, that would make me happier than this bullet point does. But it was really important. Like, we knew each other a little bit, like I said from before, and the fact that Chris could trust me to not screw up that workshop, that I could trust him that he was gonna, do the right things on his side as the stakeholder, despite having, not done a lot of actual work together. We had some trust in that. We had trust in various of the other things. Chris had built trust. He'd gone around with his blue box diagram, building trust and building some like shared understanding around people as well. And I don't think it would have been anything near what it turned out to be without having actually made use of all of those different things that we had at our disposal to bring into that moment. And then, the last thing, transformation is not linear. Like, a bunch of this stuff is taken some forwards and some backwards and gone around and like woven together here and then separated there. And it's not linear. And I think, Ruth says this all the time about braiding these things together, right? This is what real transformation is. It's actually taking a number of different stories, motivations, purposes, and different energies, and bringing them together and bringing them into a thing which can be coherent for the purpose that you're trying to achieve. So that was our story. I do want to mention again, though, there were a lot of failed attempts. So this is a survivor bias talk through and through, in the sense of like, this is the one that worked. But we want to hold that up and show some example of something that did actually work. But I want to acknowledge, like, a lot of it didn't, and it meant trying a whole bunch of stuff that didn't work, or maybe it was going to work, but in 4 years' time, I mean, like a whole bunch of it didn't have, a happy kind of boof moment. But then this one did, and those were the factors. That was the situation. That's, I think, what we've got. Oh, further reading. Yes, these are the books that influenced us. I thought I should at least acknowledge Alberto's book and Nick's book actually really did help us along the way to be able to get to this moment. So I want to kind of just mention that those are out there to help you too. And of course, if the workshop happens next year, like, maybe you want to use it in the same way. Bring somebody from across the organization to a workshop and try to engineer some change in your own organizations. Thank you very much. Do we have time for questions? We do. Hurrah. Excellent. Has anyone got any questions? Critique is also fine by me.
I have a question. I think you touched on this a little bit at the beginning, mentioning some of like the drivers for change that in a way. But you also mentioned that like you had left and then come back to achieve architectural. So I guess I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more as to like if there was additional context that led the organization to recognize the need for that role and modernization of that hustle, because I think that's a challenge I saw. I was at Medicare recently, so just if you have any more comments on that, I'd be curious to hear.
Yeah, why did that happen?
Well, can we repeat the question, Big D? Because not everyone heard.
So it's like, so I left and came back as a chief architect, and that role didn't exist when I was there originally. So, but how did they create that role? How did they see the need for that? And I think that there's some leadership changes. So we got the leadership's director, and then we had someone kind of rise from less technical things and cross into technology, become the deputy director. And so you had this understanding that the technology was becoming much more important, and there was getting more attention and more focus from leadership, but they also didn't have anyone who really understood it, and they were seeing that the different efforts to try to accomplish things weren't coming together very well, and they didn't know what it was made out of, but having a chief architect looked like a solution they could understand, and other organizations had it, and there was even a rule, like in some places you needed to have a chief architect sign something, and you don't have one of those, so I think that was kind of the genesis of the whole.
Thank you.
And then of course people said, I would never want that job here. Crazy. That's yeah. Don't wait. I know, yeah.
A lot of stuff. Yeah, question over there.
So you mentioned that you were kind of constrained or restricted to physical locations. My question is, have you run any event organization remotely with success? Because I mean, I haven't. I prefer them live, but just curious about it. Or just basically we're moving with a different physical location.
Yeah, so the question is, since we're kind of constrained in all these isolated locations, have we figured out a way to do these remotely at all, or have we thought about it? It feels like something we really need to be room for, and we definitely need to be room for this one. And we've gotten much better at having on-sites for our technical people as we're trying to do this transformation, and so that's been really good too. Is that not this audience, but pieces of it have continued this sort of on-site culture in every 3 months or so, more at the leadership level, and so that's been really good. But also people know a little bit more about how to put Post-its on board, because we did not have a whiteboarding culture before this, anyway, even in office, we didn't have the whiteboards. So doing it here for the first time, I just got some Miro licenses recently, and I was able to, somebody had an ambiguous question, and I just drove a Miro board, and we threw Post-its up for half an hour, got way further than we were in those meetings before, so we demonstrated how to do it in a building, but we are a distributed organization. And so we have had some success in doing it remotely.
So what about that initial thing you were saying about having to have the people needing to be co-located to make those decisions about tornadoes? Is that something we just
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly for the longer lead times thing, like watches and warnings, we're centralizing that function more and more. The forecast is centralized more and more. So you're building more of a national presence for that kind of thing. But you still want it to be embedded with your partners. Like the organization is architecting around our partnerships now. And so it's still going to be massively distributed on the business side.
I think we're in time, and you've all been so good to hang around, despite it being the latest lunch ever. Thank you very much. Any other questions or want to talk about anything, please hit us up at the conference. And again, thank you so much. Thank you.